I know I have said before, this chapter was kind of hard. Well, this chapter was kind of, not the first one, actually, or the second one.
So we're in chapter 9.
We are on chapters 9 and 10. Hopefully we'll do that today.
Okay.
2 Samuel 9 and 10. I think these are wonderful chapters, the first chapter 9, that tell us where David's heart is, and it's easy to see why this man was a man after God's own heart, but kind of hold on to this in your heart, because then it goes a little bit downhill. So,
Such is life.
yeah. All right, chapter 9, 2 Samuel. And David said, "Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now, a couple of things here. Remember back, and I'm going to read some verses. David and Jonathan have been, I don't know if best friends describes it well enough, but they've been very close. So if David's a man after God's own heart, and he's super close to this man, Jonathan, what does that tell us about Jonathan's heart? He had to have a heart after the Lord too. Real quick though, before we go on, turn to chapter 10, and let's read verse 2. Then said David, "I will show kindness unto Hanun, the son of Nahash, as his father showed kindness to me." And David sent to console him by the hand of his servants for his father. The word console and then kindness in chapter 9, verse 1 are the same word. Just wanted to bring that up. So David is seeking out ways to express the kindness of God, the love of God to people. And the fact that David sought a way to show his love for Jonathan in this manner. And in this chapter, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but keep in mind that this is a picture of what Jesus has done for us. Mm-hmm. David, Mephibosheth, who's the one that the main character in the chapter, he was just minding his own business, and nobody knew about him much. He was living in a place far away from David, but David sought him out. Well, did you know that God seeks us out too? So back in 1 Samuel 20, verses 14 through 17, this is Jonathan talking to David. And he says, "If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. Do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul.
20 where? 1 Samuel 21.
Chapter 20, verses 14 through 17. So, in Jonathan's covenant with David, I wonder, at one place we see that Jonathan, he tells David, "I know that you're going to be king one of these days. So I want to be right there with you and help you and do everything I can to help you." But I wonder if something also in Jonathan knew that it might not work out that way. And so he wants David to swear that he will show kindness. And it was very common for Oriental kings at this time to, when they became king, they would kill everyone else that had to do with the king before them, just so that they wouldn't have any trouble. We see that David did not do that, but that might have been a reason also for Jonathan to tell David, "Please swear to me that you'll be kind to everybody."
Why do you think Jonathan didn't go with David when David was running?
I'm not sure.
That's always
Maybe he felt too much of a loyalty to his father. Maybe he was afraid of what his father would do. Who knows? And I wanted to bring out also, not only is this a nice and a kind thing for David to do for Jonathan, but it's what God does to us. So David is showing God's kindness, extending God's kindness. So the way we treat others, and when we feel a need to extend ourselves, it's for God's sake. It's showing others who God is also. In 1 Samuel 23:18, when the two of them, David and Jonathan, had made a covenant before the Lord, David stayed at Horesh, but Jonathan went to his house. And if Jonathan had gone with David, he probably would have still been alive. So I don't know. Hard question.
Might have been a problem for the kingdom.
Yeah, it might have. God knows. Yeah. 2 Samuel chapter 21:7. We haven't gotten there yet, but this also explains a little bit of David's actions here. The king had mercy on Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, in light of the Lord's oath that had been taken between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. So it was an oath that the two of them, David and Jonathan, made with each other before God. And they acknowledged God in that oath. And then I wanted to compare it with Matthew 25, verse 40. And the king will answer them, I tell you the truth, just as you did it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it for me. So, it works both ways. The kindness that we show others is an extension of the hand of God. And if we don't treat others very well, that also is known by God. All right, let's go to verse 2. And there was of the house of Saul a servant whose name was Ziba. And when they called him unto David, the king said unto him, Art thou Ziba? He said, Thy servant is he. And the king said, Is there not yet any of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God to him? Also another verse in Luke 6:36, Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. David was acting as an extension of God, especially as the king. And Ziba said to the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame on his feet. And so it's interesting to me that that's the first thing they say. Nowadays, that would be called, what would that be called? Prejudice or bias against someone who's lame. But the first thing that was said about Mephibosheth was that he was lame on his feet. But that was what stood out. And
Possibly that he would not be of any use to David.
right. Oh, yes. Leanne said possibly that he would not be of any use to David. And some commentaries even said that would negate any possibility of him being able to be king, as he was in the line of succession. And I don't know about that. But in 2 Samuel 4, we see again, we read it before, but this tells us how his son became lame. Now Saul's son Jonathan had a son who was crippled in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan arrived from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but in her haste to get away, he fell and was injured. Mephibosheth was his name. And what probably happened is that, number one, she probably fled because now the king is dead, Jonathan's dead, and just the same as we were talking about how the next king, if it wasn't Saul's household, would very likely kill everyone that was in succession. She didn't want Mephibosheth to have to be killed, and so she ran with him, and he fell in the haste to get away. And he probably broke his legs in the fall, and they may not have been taken care of properly, which would make you lame. So, now, he says Mephibosheth was his name. I thought this was interesting because I had questions about it. Originally, his name was Meribaal, Meribaal. And I didn't realize this. Anytime I see the word Baal, you think of the Canaanite god and the idol that Israel fell by worshiping that idol. But Baal originally, I'm getting ahead of myself. Baal meant Lord in Hebrew. That was the meaning. Later, it came to mean the god of the Canaanites, whose official name was Hadad. And I didn't realize that. Baal just meant Lord. So it became hated enough by the Israelites, that word Baal, that the scribes, in writing the things they wrote, history, they would change any of the names that had Baal on the end. They would change them and add instead Bosheth. And I don't know why they chose that, but remember Ishbosheth, his name had been Eshbaal. And so that meant man of the Lord, or man of God. But it was changed to Ishbosheth, which means man of shame or bashful, it could mean. But then Mephibosheth's name, Mirabel, I might not be pronouncing that correctly, but it meant from the mouth of the Lord. And the reason it made me feel a little bit better when I found that out was because my first thought was, why would Jonathan name his son Mirabel? You know, and it makes sense. He named his son from the mouth of the Lord. Not exactly sure what he intended by that. But then when the scribes got a hold of it, it became from the mouth of shame. Or it can mean dispelling shame. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. If you take this as just a note to us concerning names, God takes away the shame in who we were before we became his sons, and now we have his name. And so whatever Mephibosheth's name actually meant, I just think it's important that we know mostly that God knows our name. And I was trying to think of a verse that said that, and you guys might know one right off, but I couldn't think of one. Other than we know that God knows our thoughts, we know he knows our ways, he knows, so obviously he's going to know our name, but anyway, so think about that. And the king in verse 4, 2 Samuel 9. And the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, behold, he is in the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lodebar. Interesting to me, the name Lodebar of that town means pastureless. I like that too.
Means what?
Pastureless.
Oh,
And of course, that's pretty easy to know.
barren.
Yes, barren, no sustenance. That's where we were before Jesus picked us out of that place and put us with him. Great.
I did a study on Psalm 23, and that's what she was saying, the lady who did the study, and made a table before me in the presence of all my enemies. This table was just in nowhere, barren, and God brought us out of that to abundance. And that's what David did for
Amen.
him. And that's so beautiful that we can relate that to what God did for us,
Yes.
and continues to do for us.
Right. So this whole story, the thing that makes this chapter especially great to me, is that it's a type of what Jesus does for us. Then King David sent and fetched him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodebar. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was come unto David, he fell on his face and did reverence. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold thy servant. So I like that. David just said his name, Mephibosheth. And God knows our name too. He says your name. And Mephibosheth could have been pretty scared at this point, wondering if he was going to get killed. Because he would know, he would have had to know that his father and David were very close friends. But he would also know that his grandfather and David were enemies. And his grandfather had been the king. So I'm sure he had a lot of trepidation when he came in before David. So, but David says his name. And then David, the next thing he says is, fear not. And this reminded me, real often when there's a visitation of an angel on someone, like in Luke 1:30, The angel said to Mary, "Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God." God tells us to not be afraid either. And then David, after Mephibosheth says, "Behold thy servant," David said, "Fear not, for I will surely show thee kindness for Jonathan thy father's sake." And here's what he's going to do. "I will restore thee all the land of Saul thy father." And we don't know exactly how much land this was, but Saul was the king, so it was probably a goodly amount. "And thou shalt eat bread at my table continually." Now this does, in our culture, it loses a lot of its meaning, because we're just thinking, okay, we'll have him over for dinner constantly. Nope. No, this means he would come under David's protection. He would live in Jerusalem, and I believe he lived at the palace, and David would provide for him. So even though he would have all the land that his grandfather Saul had, that would have provided for him fine, but he also was going to be provided for at David's house. And so, of course, who provides for us? Jesus, yes. And he provides very well for us.
Here, that verse you may have been wondering about was in Isaiah 43, verses 1 and 2. It says, "But now saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee, I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine."
Oh, yes. I like that. It's a very, there's billions of people on the earth, and God knows your name and mine. And if we could just remember that, that might help us when things seem to not go our way, or we're down, or, but God knows our name. And he knows our name, he knows the trouble.
And he says he knows the names of the stars. Well, the stars
Are
stars,
inanimate,
but he
yeah.
doesn't have fellowship with the
Right.
stars.
Right.
He didn't redeem them.
Right. Okay. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then said Ziba unto the king, "According to all that my lord the king hath commanded his servant, so shall thy servant do." I skipped one, sorry. I don't know how I did that. Back up at verse 8. He bowed himself, Mephibosheth did, and said, "What is thy servant that thou shouldest look upon such a dead dog as I am?" He's just belittling himself in front of the king, is what he's doing. Just a real quick thought, in Luke 22:30, Jesus is talking there to his disciples, and he says that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. So when we eat and drink at somebody's table, it means we are right there with them. They will take care of us. And so that's what David meant. And then the king called to Ziba, I'm in verse 9, Saul's servant, and said to him, "I've given unto thy master's son all that pertained to Saul and to all his house. Thou therefore and thy sons and thy servants shall till the land for him, and thou shalt bring in the fruit, that thy master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, thy master's son, shall eat bread always at my table." So even though he was providing for Mephibosheth had a son also, Micah is his name, and perhaps he had other members of his family, maybe servants. But anyway, all those people would be provided for by the land and by the servant Ziba, who had been Saul's servant. But Mephibosheth himself would be at David's table. And I want to be at Jesus' table. So, now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then said Ziba to the king, "According to all that my lord the king hath commanded his servant, so shall thy servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table as one of the king's sons." I think God wanted us to get the picture here, get the type. We are not even just as one of the king's sons, we are the king's son. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all that dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants unto Mephibosheth. So he dwelt there in Jerusalem, and he did eat continually at the king's table, and was lame on both his feet. It's interesting to me, again, God brings that out. So I thought, being lame on both his feet, in those days it was definitely, what's a good word? It was not a good thing, and it was a mark against you. And people didn't pay the same respect at all for those who were lame. It meant that he probably couldn't make his own living by working, and so he had to depend on the goodness of others. It indicates weakness and imperfection. They couldn't hold positions working in the temple at all. I think they could go in, but not hold positions. So I think we need to realize that we have nothing to offer the Lord. And of course, that just makes sense if you think about it. Our God is the God who created the universe. What does he need us for? But the fact that he does, he wants us, he needs our fellowship, wants our fellowship. He seeks us out. He's not just up there, and then if we bug him, he'll say, okay, I'll listen to you. What's your name again? No. God is very personal, and he just wants us to know how much he loves us. So we put that chapter in the Bible here.
I love that chapter. It's one of my favorites.
Yes.
So when you were describing Mephibosheth and being lame and what that meant in those times, it's almost like life as we know it is over for him.
Right, a stigma.
He's going nowhere, you see, until David takes him in.
It's of no benefit.
And we were going nowhere.
Right, and it changes Mephibosheth's life forever. I just wanted to read in Matthew 15:30, large crowds came to him, this is Jesus, having with them the lame, the blind, the deformed, those unable to speak, and many others. They put them at his feet, and he healed them. I've always thought, and I believe this, that Jesus has a special place in his heart for people that are outcasts, ones that maybe we don't want to be near or spend any time with, or because they're outcasts, they're I don't know what words to use, but they don't command respect in our society. Everybody feels sorry and pity, and these are the ones that Jesus died for. He would have given his life for them had we not even been around, the ones of us that don't have an obvious thing, but we all are no different at all. We have nothing where Jesus is concerned, but he gave his life for us. This chapter does a good job of bringing that out.
Last night when I was speaking about those commercials of the Super Bowl where it says he gets us, some of those commercials were just like that, showing the people that Jesus loved and associated with,
Yes.
and it says, and he gets us.
Yes.
Wherever we are, he gets us.
Right.
And he knows.
Right. He doesn't look upon our weaknesses and it make him turn away, repulsed, because that's how a lot of people would react to these, but Jesus loves them.
People would react that way to us if they knew our hearts.
Yes,
sometimes.
yes. I think
Filthy
so.
And God,
rags.
if they knew our
They saw
heart,
our filthy rags, they would turn away.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
stench.
Yes, it is. It is.
So Jesus cleaned us up.
He did. He did. And it's like the perfect Cinderella story almost. This chapter shows what Jesus has done for us. Now, we'll go ahead into the next chapter, chapter 10. After this, the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanan his son reigned in his place. And just for a little bit of background, it brought me more questions than answers, but I'll tell you the background. This King Nahash, that was Hanan's father who died, he was the same king that attacked Saul, Israel, during when Saul first became king. And he said, I'm going to put your eyes out, or all of your right eyes out, I think, anyway, and you're going to have to pay taxes to me. That was the same guy. Um, and and that's why that was the first battle, I think, that Saul engaged in. He sent he cut up a cow and sent it all to the tribes, and he said, this is what's going to happen to your cows if you don't come and help these people in Jabesh Gilead. They were the ones that King Nahash of the Ammonites were coming against. And so, of course, then all Israel gathered and they had a great victory. But this is the same guy. Why David, he said, I will show kindness unto him, the son, as his father showed kindness to me. So we don't know what happened between that battle, because when David first comes on the scene as killing Goliath, being the shepherd and then killing Goliath, he was with Saul. And so at that time, that guy couldn't have been, you wouldn't have thought that he would have been showing kindness to David. But it could have been after David had to run from Saul that something happened. We aren't told, so we don't need to know. But anyway, that's the background on that king. And David said, I will deal loyally. That word in King James is David sent to console him by the hand of his servants with Hanun the son of Nahash, as his father dealt loyally with me. So David sent by his servants to console him concerning his father, and David's, oh, I got that wrong. It's the kindness. That's the word that's the same. And that's translated the same in the King James. So his servants came into the land of the Ammonites. But the princes of the Ammonites said to Hanun their lord, do you think because David has sent comforters to you that he is honoring your father? Has not David sent his servants to you to search the city and to spy it out and overthrow it? David was having so many victories in his battles with other kingdoms that, that the Ammonites here were suspicious. So Hanun took David's servants and shaved off half the beard of each. And, you know, they probably had long beards, I'm guessing. And it didn't mean that he cut this way. He cut this way, you know. So half of their face was shaved and the other half had a beard. And cut off their garments in the middle at their hips and sent them away. So cut off their garments so as to reveal their nakedness is what that was. When it was told David, he sent to meet them, for the men were greatly ashamed. Can you imagine? And the king said, remain at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return. So it was east of Jericho where the Ammonite country is. And then, so they had to cross the Jericho to get back to Jerusalem. So they stayed there until their beards grew out, and hopefully someone gave them something to wear. And then verse 6. When the Ammonites saw that they had become a stench to David, the Ammonites sent and hired the Syrians of Beth Rehob and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers, and the king of Maacah with 1,000 men, and the men of Tob, 12,000 men. And when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the host of the mighty men. And the Ammonites came out and drew up in battle array at the entrance of the gate. We're not sure what city gate this is because he doesn't give the name, but there's several ideas. One would be Reba, which is their capital city, or Rabbah, I'm not sure how to say that. Or it could have been Medeba. And let me show you on this real quick. So, I don't know if you can see this. This is a Tob, or Tob. And so it's all these lands over here that came together to fight. They came to help Ammon fight against Israel. And so down here is Rabbah or Reba. And then up a little ways is, I don't think it's even on this map, but just north a little ways is, how do you say that, Medeba? So, you know, what interested me, I like to find out where these things are. what interested me is, they're not just right around Jerusalem within walking distance. I mean, it was walking distance, but it was a long ways. I mean, it might take them, I don't know, weeks probably to get there, especially with a large army. So anyhow, the Syrians of Zobah and Rehob and the men of Tob and Maacah were by themselves in open country. So there was the city that the Ammonites were in, and then there was all the people that they had called to help them. The Syrians is what they were called on the fields. Now, back in verse 7, when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the hosts of the mighty men. Keep that in a little place in your mind. We're going to talk about that a little bit in another study next week, probably. I don't know why David didn't go himself. Maybe he had a good reason. I'm sure he did, because we're not told anything. It might have been a good reason. But anyway, just the fact that David didn't go, he sent Joab. But one thing about that place, Rehob, in Judges 1:31, we read of that place. The men of Asher, which remember was one of the 12 tribes of Judah, after they came in, this is back a little way, probably 100 to 200 years before this time. The men of Asher did not conquer the people living in Acco or Sidon, nor did they conquer, and it mentions 4 different places, or Rehob. So it was a town or I don't know if it was a country town, I think. But anyway, they did not conquer that town. So remember when Joshua took the Israelites in and they systematically conquered Canaan. But remember, they didn't do a complete job. Remember, there were several places here and there that were not conquered. This is one that was not. So what do you think might have happened had the children of Israel been completely obedient to the Lord in conquering every city?
They wouldn't be doing this right now.
They wouldn't be doing this right now. Right. I thought of that and I thought, so many of these battles fall under that. They should have conquered, because what they did was they gave trouble for their own children and grandchildren later. So verse 9. When Joab saw that the battle was set against him both in front and rear, so remember there was a city where the Ammonites were and then the plains where the Syrians were, and Joab and his army must have been in the middle. So he chose some of the best men of Israel, and these were amazing men, kind of like the superstars on TV, you see. They were amazing in the feats that they accomplished. They were very, very skilled warriors. He chose some of the best men of Israel and arrayed them against the Syrians. The rest of his men he put in charge of Abishai, his brother, and Joab and Abishai and the one that had been killed, Amasa, those 3 were very, very skilled warriors also. So Joab and Abishai are the ones that are left, and they both were very mighty men in David's army. He arrayed them against the Ammonites, and he said, if the Syrians are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come and help you. Now, notice verse 12. I underlined verse 12 because it gives you a side of Joab that we had not seen yet. Be of good courage, and let us be courageous for our people and for the cities of our God. Whatever city this was, either Medeba or Rabbah, it should have belonged to Israel, but the Ammonites were there. So that's why he says, let us be courageous for our people, for the cities of our God, and may the Lord do what seems good to him. Now, to me, that doesn't necessarily seem like a prayer, but it is. It's just worded, kind of strange. But it is a prayer of Joab. He's saying, God, have your way. We need victory here for your cities and for your people. And I thought about Joab. So here's a man that didn't mind killing when he shouldn't have. And he seems a little devious to me. And he is. I mean, that's a fact. However, he's praying right now. So I actually even thought maybe working under a king that justly, maybe this was something that had influenced Joab at this point. Just think about that for a little bit. Okay. A verse that goes kind of along with this and shows you a little bit more what Joab meant by what he said in Nehemiah 4:14. When I had made an inspection, that was Nehemiah, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the great and awesome Lord, and fight on behalf of your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your families. So Joab, that's kind of what he was indicating when he said, let us be courageous for our people and for the cities of our God. In other words, they weren't just trying to be out there greedily grabbing up land for no reason. They were fighting for their own country and for their families.
Where did you read that?
That was in Nehemiah
The
4:14.
last thing you just read?
Yeah.
Oh.
But you know, it's kind of like, maybe it is, I don't know. Maybe there were a lot of these men, they were fighting for Israel because that's who they were, it's what they were. And you think about Israelis today, they're giving their life for that country.
Yeah.
But they don't know God.
Oh, I know.
It's a nationalistic
yes,
type
true.
of pride. I mean, and God gave it to them. They wouldn't be where they were without it. But maybe Joab was
Had some
kind
of
that way.
Might have been. Barnes, a commentary that sometimes I read, he said, this rather indicates that the relief of this city was one of the immediate objects in view, and consequently that at this time it was still in the possession of the Reubenites. To prevent an Israelite city from falling into the hands of a heathen people and the rites of Moloch being substituted for the worship of Jehovah was a very, very urgent motive to valor. So, you know, when an army is fighting, a lot depends on their perceptions and their heart. If they're in despair and think they're going to lose, that army's not going to be very successful. The way we think and see things, our perspective plays a lot in what we do. So Joab was reminding them, we're fighting for our families and our country, and he was saying, encouraging them to be full of courage. Let's get this done. And he talked about God. So whether or not, what was in his heart, we don't really know. But at this point, he did invoke God. Verse 13. So Joab and the people who were with him drew near to battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. And when the Ammonites saw that the Syrians fled, they likewise fled before Abishai and entered the city. Then Joab returned from fighting against the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. So they took care of the matter at hand. We'll see later they need to take care of it completely. But at this point, it didn't evidently make any sense to go against the city. So Joab got his army together and they came back. Verse 15, but when the Syrians saw that they'd been defeated by Israel, they gathered themselves together. And Hadadezer sent and brought out the Syrians who were beyond the Euphrates. Now remember, Hadadezer had been one that David had conquered before. But perhaps he thought at this point he could throw off David's yoke. Because when a kingdom was conquered by another one, they had to pay tribute. Yes, they were under that kingdom. And that wasn't a place that any of them wanted to be. So he's trying to get out of that place. They came to Helam, with Shobach, the commander of the army of Hadadezer, at their head. And when it was told David, now watch this, he gathered all Israel together and crossed the Jordan and came to Helam. So now David's with the army. I don't know if it was a more extensive threat, and so David went, or stronger, or whatever. I'm not sure why he wasn't with Joab in the beginning, but now he's with the army. The Syrians arrayed themselves against David and fought with him. And the Syrians fled before Israel, and David killed of the Syrians the men of 700 chariots. And in 1 Chronicles, it tells about this same battle. it says 7,000. And so, these numbers sometimes are not the same. But in giving the details, it seems like First Chronicles, at least one of the commentaries said, they're usually, First Chronicles author was a little bit more detailed and comprehensive in their rights, so he thought it would be the 7,000. And 40,000 horsemen, and wounded Shobach, the commander of their army, so that he died there. And when all the kings who were servants of Hadadezer saw that they'd been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became subject to them. So the Syrians were afraid to save the Ammonites anymore. Well, they couldn't. So why do you think David and Israel were successful?
It could be the Lord.
Yes. Because, we don't know exactly the number of how large Israel's army was. Most of the time, their armies were smaller than these other kingdoms. But we know that God, that doesn't make any difference to God at all. So,
In fact, I think sometimes in the places that God used it for that purpose, he did that with
Yes.
Gideon,
Yes.
so that they wouldn't take glory or pride in the fact that they had won the battle.
yes. Now, I'd like to go ahead and turn to Psalms 20. So everyone, if you'll turn to Psalms 20.
We're not going to do David's great tower. Great soon.
We're going to do that next week.
Okay, now go where?
Psalms 20. We're going to read Psalms 20 and 21. Because they think that these two Psalms were written after this battle. I don't know how they know. But I'm kind of going, I have a chronological Bible, I'm kind of going with that. But
Was it, I just have a question. Wasn't it standard that the king always went for his men?
yes, unless I'm missing something, which could be, but I think that was the first time when David sent Joab, that's the first time we read that David wasn't with the army.
So I wonder if that one little thing led to the next one.
That's exactly what I was wondering. That's why I wanted to bring it to your attention. We don't know. It may have been a real good reason. It may have. And yet, David could have thought, oh, God still saved the army.
It worked before.
It worked before. Yeah. So,
No act of deed.
yes. So anyway, Psalms 20. The Lord hear thee in the day of trouble. I'm going to read it in a different translation just for fun. May the Lord answer you when you are in trouble. May the God of Jacob make you secure. May he send you help from his temple. From Zion may he give you support. May he take notice of all your offerings. May he accept your burnt sacrifice. May he grant your heart's desire. May he bring all your plans to pass. Then we will shout for joy over your victory. We will rejoice in the name of our God. May the Lord grant all your requests. Now I am sure that the Lord will deliver his chosen king. David's talking about himself there, I'm sure. He will intervene for him from his holy heavenly temple and display his mighty ability to deliver. Some trust in chariots and others in horses, but we depend on the Lord our God.
Amen.
They will fall down, but we will stand firm. The Lord will deliver the king. He will answer us when we call to him for help. David had every reason to write this psalm in this way. And, the chariots, the armies that had chariots usually had advantage over the ones that did not. And Israel didn't normally, in Solomon's time, they might have started using chariots, but they didn't have that many wars in Solomon's time. It was David that was getting rid of all the enemies. And he didn't use chariots. And even when he had victory over the Ammonites who did use chariots and the Syrians who did, he didn't take their chariots and start using them. He was fine with his army and God. That's all he needed. And so you can see how David's victory here made him almost euphoric in his writing the song. God is with us, and he knew it. He knew God would answer prayers. He just was on top of it, on top of the mountain. And then let's read Psalms 21 also. This is even more exulting, I think. O Lord, the king rejoices in the strength you give. He takes great delight in the deliverance you provide. You grant him his heart's desire. You do not refuse his request. Selah. For you bring him rich blessings. You place a golden crown on his head. He asked you to sustain his life, and you've granted him long life and an enduring dynasty. Your deliverance brings him great honor. You give him majestic splendor. For you grant him lasting blessings. You give him great joy by allowing him into your presence. For the king trusts in the Lord, and because of the Most High's faithfulness, he is not shaken. You prevail over all your enemies. Your power is too great for those who hate you. You burn them up like a fiery furnace when you appear. The Lord angrily devours them. The fire consumes them. You destroy their offspring from the earth, their descendants from among the human race. Yes, they intend to do you harm. They dream up a scheme, but they do not succeed. For you make them retreat when you aim your arrows at them. Rise up, O Lord, in strength. We will sing and praise your power. So, God was doing mighty things for David. And the only thing I want to say, and this is because of the next chapter that we're going to talk about next week, I think sometimes it's more of a temptation to not follow the Lord as committed with as much faithfulness or as detailed or as strongly, because he's blessed us. He blessed David over and over and over again until, God's for me. And, maybe that was one of the reasons that he didn't go with Joab and God still won the battle for him. There's nothing wrong with these Psalms at all. They're wonderful. He exults in God. His heart is in the right place. But sometimes I think it's harder to yield to God in times of prosperity than in times of trial. It's almost like you have to be extra careful when God has given you peace and blessings, and not that we don't want those things. But do we need him as much then as when you're just about to die? No, we don't.
It shows the frailty of men again.
Yes, it does. And it also shows me that God is really wise when he brings trials, and we shouldn't chafe under them. And it's easy to, but they work a great work in us. It's not worked in times of blessing, I think. The times of blessing are wonderful, and I want them, but we've got to be extra watchful and guard ourselves extra when God blesses us. So I do appreciate it encourages you for God to do this for David. We know that God wants to do it for us too. And it was God's pleasure to do this for his people. But we'll see what happened. And one thing that you all know about the next chapter, we'll talk about David and his sin with Bathsheba. The one thought that has been in my mind when I was looking ahead is, and then therefore it was in my mind when I was studying this lesson. I was trying to see, what was it? Is there anything that I could see that gives a reason for David's downfall? And have that in your thoughts too. Because God doesn't, Scripture doesn't tell us, but there's some things you can conjecture with a pretty sure mind. So anyway, I'm a little early today.
I have a question, something that Alice said when we were talking back about David and David not going and sending Joab and that. and then maybe it made it easier the next time or something, and you said just that one little disobedience. Is there some place where it is said that the king had to go out before
No, she called it a disobedience, and that's just conjecture. I wouldn't
Yeah.
probably
that?
call it that.
Oh, okay, because I thought, well, maybe I just had never heard it
Well, that's why I
said
was
that way.
asking, was it standard for a king to always go
We saw that David did go out every time.
all the time?
Yeah, he did. And there
I mean,
might have been a real good reason, we just aren't
Mhm.
told. And it doesn't say anything against David for not doing that. And Joab doesn't say anything, nobody says anything that we know of. But I wonder if it didn't just make it a little easier to do that then in the next chapter.
And the next one says, when the kings go out.
Yes,
That's
right.
the only thing we know is that when
And I
the kings
think-
go out.
I think that
They
is
didn't
written there because
He
it
was
should.
disobeying.
Yes,
Yes.
and that I understand, and the fact that, I mean, it's very pointed that David wasn't where he was supposed to be.
Right.
But I didn't know if there was something earlier.
No,
It said they weren't supposed to have horses and they weren't supposed to have chariots. That was all, and the wives. All those things were spoken of
yeah.
way back before they even had kings, I think. But so I thought, well, maybe that was it, and I just never
No.
thought about it or heard it. So,
Conjecture and
Yeah.
thinking out loud.
well, and that's all right. I mean, it's very evident that he oughtn't to have been at home.
Yeah.
Or he ought to have been
On
looking
the
over
next
his
one,
balcony.
Yeah, on the next.
That's right. Alice, do you mind?
Oh, I just always forget.
It's
that's
okay.
all.
I will hand your questions out.
Okay, you know where Karen Burke is today?
She and Jerry went to Mesa.
Okay.
But for wood carving,
Oh, yeah, I did,
Thank
those things she mentioned that last week.
I guess I just got one. Oh, no, two.